Hey everyone. Sorry for the empty chair at the beginning of this devotional, but I think as some of you know, I have been home this whole week with COVID. And I do not have my wonderful, lovely, and talented assistant to help me film this because we are doing the best we can to stay at a distance, which is not easy, which is not fun, but we're doing that because so far Melanie is testing negative and I'm happy about that and I want to keep her that way. Anyway, for this devotional this week, I really was drawn to what I was going to be preaching on last week and then this week. And I really felt like I wanted this opportunity to do this particular devotional so that I could bring out the point that I thought was going to be an important point to make. I want to begin, though, with the question: have any of you ever heard of the line, "Good fences make good neighbors"? You know, that's a line that I remember hearing one time when we were moving into a new area and we were deciding whether we were going to put up a fence. Good fences make good neighbors. But maybe you don't realize this. The line actually comes from a Robert Frost poem. And it is in this context where these two farmers or two neighbors are doing their annual walking across their properties and repairing the wall that was between the one neighbor's property and the other. And it's kind of an interesting poem because on the one hand, while one of the farmers, the main speaker, seems to be questioning whether or not this is a necessary thing to do, the other farmer has the line, "Good fences make good neighbors." But you know, I was really wondering about that. Do good fences make good neighbors, or do they just really just keep us separated so we don't ever have to get to know each other? Now, the context in which I wanted to talk about this is kind of interesting because today is actually Ascension Sunday. This is the day that we celebrate Jesus being ascending into heaven after having a conversation with the disciples. And that story is told probably most clearly in Acts chapter 1. What happens is the disciples have gathered together and they want to know, when is Jesus going to restore, as they say, the kingdom of Israel? They want to know when Jesus is going to go back and establishing the kingdom of Israel. Now, that's probably because Jesus has been said to have been talking about the kingdom during this time between the resurrection and his ascension. And so they assume that this means the kingdom of Israel, the kingdom that they once knew, the kingdom where Israel was strong and God was on their side and they ruled the entire area. They wanted to know, when were we going to return to that time? Well, you know, Jesus doesn't answer that question. Basically, what he says to them, that no one knows other than God himself whether or when this time is going to be. But what he tells the disciples is this: you will receive the power of the Holy Spirit. And you will receive this power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you. And then, he says, you will be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Now, that's an interesting line that Jesus says to them. You're going to have the power of the Holy Spirit, the power that Jesus has just been living in, the power that Jesus claimed that he had at the very beginning of his ministry in Luke's gospel. And he says this power of the Holy Spirit that you're going to get will allow you and strengthen you to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, the town that they were in Judea, the friendly Jewish region that they lived in, but then Samaria, the enemies of Samaria, and to the ends of the earth, where we don't even know who's out there, if they're even close to being like us, if they are even acceptable to us. You know, it's interesting right here in the very beginning of the church, Jesus is telling those who will go on to form the church, when I depart from you, you will receive the power of the Holy Spirit to be my witnesses to those you like, those you don't like, and those you don't even know. You know, that is a powerful message. Because when I think about the ministry of the church, the idea of ministering to those I like, well, that's okay. That's easy. To those I don't like, now it's getting harder. For those I don't even know, well, how do I know if that's going to be a good thing or not? It makes me think sometimes I just need to build a fence. I just need to do my best, because then I won't have to deal with them. And you know what? Good fences make good neighbors. That is not a quote from Jesus. Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. And when he was asked, who's my neighbor? The example that he was given is one of a Samaritan coming and administering care to someone who had been beaten up. That story of the Good Samaritan. That is the neighbor. The neighbor doesn't have to be someone you like. It doesn't have to be someone you know. It's someone that God has put in your path, and you are to minister to them. You know, it goes right back to what Jesus said at the very beginning of his ministry in Luke's gospel. And I preached on this the week before I wasn't able to because I had COVID. And this was this time where Jesus comes back to his hometown, and he goes to the synagogue and he preaches, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, and he has called me to bring good news to the poor, to bring release to the captive, to bring recovery of sight to the blind, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And everyone in the sanctuary, in the synagogue at that moment, loved what he was saying. They loved it. The Spirit of the Lord was upon him, and he was going to do great things. But then Jesus goes on to talk about, you know, God did great things through the prophets, not only to those we like, but to those we don't like. And he gives a couple examples of this. All this is taking place in Luke chapter 4. And by the end of this little story of Jesus going to the synagogue, after he has said, look, the prophets ministered to those who were not friendlies to us, who were people that we would consider enemies. Right after he says this and he gives those examples, the mood in the synagogue was turned from one where people were celebrating it to they were ready to throw him off the cliff. They were absolutely ready to throw Jesus off the cliff. They didn't want any part of what Jesus' ministry was if it included Samaria and the remotest ends of the earth. Yeah, we're good with our own hometown. We're good with that. We're good with our own country, our own people who are like us and people who we understand. But once we start going out beyond that, good fences make good neighbors. We want to erect a border between us because it's too scary. It's too frightening to think about reaching out. And you know what? In all honesty, yeah, sometimes it is. There's a lot of people that may want to hurt us. And the extreme challenge of the gospel is to trust that God is calling us to do things and to be in places where we can have an incredible impact. You know, I'm doing this devotional also right after we've had yet another tragic killing in schools. Now, at this point, I don't know what motivated that particular shooter. Whatever motivated him, it was not a good motivation. But it's also on the heels of another shooting that happened at a church in California. And that seems to have been racially motivated. And it also happened on the heels of another shooting that happened in Buffalo, where that one was definitely racially motivated. And it was done out of fear that the person that was shooting was going to lose their rightful power because of who they saw themselves to be. You know what? Good fences, we may think they make good neighbors, but in reality, they just help us define our enemies even more. And when Jesus said the power of the Holy Spirit was coming upon him, it was that same power that he was going to say to those disciples, the Spirit is going to come upon you too. And just like I have been called not just to minister to the friendlies, but to minister to people that you all would consider my enemies. Now I'm going to be sending you, the church, to minister to those who are like you, those who are see the world defined as you see the world defined, but also to Samaria and to the remotest ends of the earth, to people we may consider our enemies, to people that we may not even know. Friends, this is the work of the church. And right now, when we see the divisions and the things that are going on around us in our world, we've got to realize that for whatever reason, the church has not had the impact that it needs to have in order to heal this. And yes, perhaps even start tearing down some fences that may have been erected for what we think of as good reasons, keeping us safe, keeping us from harm, but in reality may just be creating and defining more enemies for us. There is nothing at all about this message of Jesus that is easy. Nothing at all that is easy about this. And you know what? We may not be able to do it on our own, but we're told that we don't have to, because the power of the Holy Spirit is going to come upon us to do this work. Now, on June 5th, we will be celebrating Pentecost, and that is the day that the Holy Spirit actually did descend upon those disciples. And it began that work of the church. And perhaps we can make Pentecost 2022 somehow be the day where the Holy Spirit comes now and begins to tear down a fence that was erected that should not be erected, to break down a wall that maybe should not have been ever built, and help us as a church become the witnesses that we are called to be. Let me say it again. There is nothing easy about this. And it's not even easy sometimes for us to hear. But such is the calling to which we have been called. I hope to all see you all again in worship soon. I hope that we can get through this crazy pandemic and this new spike together. But I hope, most importantly, that on the other side of this, we recognize the calling to which we have been called. Thanks you all for listening. And may God continue to go with us and grow God's church in this place for all people. Thanks.